I was bullied for most of my primary school life and I didn't even know about it. Let me explain. Firstly, just to clarify to those who aren't aware, school life in Australia is divided into primary school, which is for kids between the age of 5 and 12 roughly, and then there's secondary school or high school, which is for kids who are aged 13 to 18. So this all took place during primary school. The year before I started primary school, we had just moved into the new neighbourhood and mum had enrolled me into a kindergarten. When we got there, my mum recognised one of the other mums because she was our new neighbour and she brought me over so I could meet her son. Let's call him Deku. Now, obviously my memory from when I was 4 years old is a little vague, but I don't really recall ever playing or talking to Deku that much. We were at best 4-year-old acquaintances. Apparently, Deku and his mum used to come over all the time when we were younger, but I don't really have much memories of that. I do remember one day when I was like 7, my mum told me that Deku was Asian, but I heard it as ancient. So, for a while, I thought Deku came from the ruins. Anyway, rewind back to when primary school began. As a kid, I couldn't really say whether I was introverted or not, but I had my priorities. I loved playing Pokemon with my brother, I read a lot of books, especially anything about fantasy, and I loved making my parents proud. They were the only things I really ever cared about. So the first few years of primary school, I kept to myself. I didn't even try to make friends. I didn't think I needed them because what was the point? They wouldn't help me with my priorities. I can't believe this was my mindset at the age of 6. During class, I did all my classwork, and whenever I finished, I just asked for extra work, so I was always doing something. And during recess and lunch, I would either sit by myself playing on my Game Boy, or I'd go find my brother and play with him. This worked for the first few years, but because my brother was 4 years older than I was, well, I guess he technically still is, this meant that as soon as I was in the 3rd grade, he moved on to high school, and so I was left alone. For the entire primary school experience, Deku was in most of my classes. A friendly nod when we made eye contact, hey, can I borrow a pencil? Or even walking home together when we bumped into each other. Those were what our interactions were limited to. Deku was a very popular kid and he had a lot of friends, and I wasn't really interested in having friends, so this exchange was perfect for both of us. Now, I can't recall how exactly it came to be, but in the 3rd grade I found myself becoming friends with 2 boys. Let's call them Alpha and Beta. You'll see why soon. I think we might have become friends over our mutual love for Pokemon, but that's not what's important here. As you can probably guess, Alpha was a straight up. He was the type of bully who was nice and quiet to everyone else, but when it came to his own friend circle, it was an entirely different story. Alpha and Beta's favourite thing to do in school was to see how much they could push me and get away with it, which was always. They would try to exclude me from games or conversations as much as possible while still maintaining a friendship with me, so I would suffer even more. They were rude, arrogant, and always used me for things. They would come up with stupid rules like, you can't play with us today if you have tips in your hair. I used to tip dye my hair, shut up, moving on. Or, you're it in the game of tag, but you aren't allowed to run at all. Very, very stupid and petty things, but this was a daily occurrence. I was also a huge nerd in primary school who always did his work and always answered questions in class, and every time I did, Alpha and Beta would either loudly snicker or say straight to my face that I was a nerd. By the way, being called a nerd back then wasn't exactly cool and hip like it is today. It was a legitimate insult. One I never quite understood, if I'm being honest. Like, yes, I am a nerd who wants a job and a stable future. Now what? I remember specifically there was this group of girls a year below us who we used to play tag with, and Alpha had a massive crush on one of the girls. And during playing tag, she would always try and tag me. This didn't go well with Alpha. He accused me of being a bad friend and told me I wasn't allowed to play with them when they were with those girls. And just like that, I was once again excluded. Pretty much anything I did or said They would use it against me to make me feel excluded, worthless, and beneath them. I was that friend who was the staple for all the jokes and insults to be thrown at. Fun fact is, whenever Alpha wasn't at school, me and Beta got along great. Or if Beta wasn't at school, Alpha was just that little bit nicer to me. These guys were totally stereotypical bullies. And this lasted from the 3rd grade all the way to the 6th. Sixth grade. 6th TH. Ugh. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sultan, if it lasted for so long, why did you stay being friends with them? Well, I didn't know any better. Remember that before these guys, I never really had friends before. I didn't know how friends were supposed to act, and this all felt normal to me. The constant beatdowns and insults, my poor child brain thought all of these things were normal. And I think it was around the 3rd grade where I started to fantasize about being a social person and actually having friends. So if the insults and abuse meant I could be in a friend circle, then it was worth it. Fast forward to the 6th grade, and our school had a sports excursion or something along those lines, and so most of the school was at this event while those who didn't participate had to stay in school. This included me, Alpha, and Beta. Because of this, the school was pretty much empty. Lunchtime rolls around, and as we were all walking outside to begin lunchtime, Deku comes up to me. His regular friend group were all at the school event and he was left behind, so he asked me if he could play with me. Obviously, my timid self turned to get approval from Alpha. I couldn't just say yes without asking the boss man. But Alpha said yes straight away. Remember that Deku was part of the popular kids, and this seemed to excite Alpha and Beta. Anyway, as we started to play, the shenanigans started once again, only this time, they were extra worse. Name calling, the creating of fake rules to disadvantage only me. They were extra mean to me that day, and I think it was because they wanted to impress Deku, the popular kid. Like, ooh, look how mean and cool we are. Deku, for the most part, I remember remained pretty quiet and frowned a lot. As we continued to play, I don't recall what exactly went down, but things escalated pretty quickly. I think Alpha had just pushed me or called me something extremely offensive or something along those lines because I remember feeling extremely sad. I think above all, I was embarrassed. Whenever I walked home with Deku, I used to speak so highly of Alpha and Beta and tell them how close we were as friends. I was proud to be their friend. And once Alpha began to bully me in front of Deku, I was ashamed and thought, now Deku can see I'm a fraud and I'm not as close to these guys as I said I was. But then, something happened. Something that would have an everlasting effect on me. Deku snapped. He started to yell at Alpha with so much anger in his voice. He began yelling things like, "You're a disgusting person, and why the hell are you treating Sultan like crap for?" And the next thing he said, I remember so vividly. He turned to me and he asked me, "Why do you just sit there and take it? You know you don't have to be their friend, right?" Then and there, something changed inside me. Deku grabbed my arm and yelled backwards at the boys that we aren't playing with you anymore. I remember turning around and seeing Alpha and Beta just staring at us, looking shocked at what just happened. I turned around and I never looked back. Now, you're probably thinking this is the part where I tell you that me and Deku went on to become great friends and I never heard from Alpha and Beta again, but this story goes a bit deeper than that. But I think I'll save it for another time.